Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I'm not able to turn on my camera. If I turn on my camera, it keeps on switching off. So if you don't mind, we can proceed without a camera. I do have a slide, a PowerPoint presentation, which would be shared after my presentation, if you don't mind. It will have the details. I would like to make this as interactive as possible, just to put on the table some key questions for conversation and for discussion. And then the presentation will be shared after this discussion. To begin with, colleagues, my topic is China-Russia potential frictional points in Africa. I'm sure I'm building on the previous presenter. I listened to part of the previous presenter's presentation. Generally, people think of China and Russia in Africa as friends, as cooperating, and as working together, colluding, and collaborating. But maybe we need to also think about the potential frictional points which have emerged and are also emerging. And this is where my presentation is. As you may all know, colleagues, China and Russia are expanding their influence in Africa. It's really, really expanding. In particular, China has expanded its influence in all the sectors of life, of society, of the state, whether this is in the infrastructure, whether it's construction, whether it's in media, political parties, agriculture, security services sector. China is there, but Russia is also there. Although Russia is a junior player when it comes to on a balance of scale between China and Russia. Russia is there, but its expansiveness is less than that of China. Russia is mostly, as the colleagues have said earlier, Russia is mostly in the area of the mining sector. It is there, but also in arms trade. It is this is where it is maybe its main forte, where it's providing arms to both governments and to some insurgents, to some other, non-state actors. So we need to understand what this means. Number one, if you look at China, China is providing infrastructure, is building infrastructure, huge infrastructure. Whether this infrastructure is the road, the airports, and others. And Russia, on the other side, is providing military and supporting and creating some instabilities in Africa. So the question before us, and the question even for the future, what is likely to happen when China is building infrastructure and Russia is supporting wars, supporting instability, which are likely to destroy the infrastructure that is created by Russia, that is constructed by Russia. So this is a potential area of friction, potential area where the two may, we don't know, maybe, but in the future, may actually, this may degenerate into some kind of antagonistic cooperation or into some kind of confrontation. We are not yet sure for now, but clearly the two approaches by the two countries are not in sync when it comes to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in the infrastructure area, and the support by China, by Russia, supporting the insurgencies, supporting the coups, and creating some political instability, creating wars, which may destroy the infrastructure. So that kind of a relationship is shaky. It may look stable because of what happens in the United Nations General Assembly, United Nations Security Council, where they cooperate. It would look like these two countries are working together. But if you say, let's look below the radar, what is happening below the radar? There are these challenges already. Colleagues may know or have been following. In West Africa, when the coups, there's a wave of coups in West Africa. If you look at if you listen to the narratives and discourses, you would find that generally China has not been supporting those coups, has been opposed to some of those coups, and yet those coups are supported by Russia. So Russia and China are not necessarily waltzing together, tangoing together, dancing together, cooperating together all the time in all the issues. But in this particular issue, we see China taking a different. Am I there? I seem like I've been pushed out. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
You can
Oh,
keep
okay.
going.
So, thank you. So I was saying, the two countries seem to have these developing these fissures, these fault lines that are emerging, to the extent that in the recent years we have seen China now beginning to increase its own security presence in Africa, also even increasing its exports of weapons in Africa. The question then becomes, is China building its military, getting into the military space, security space? Of course, it started with United Nations peacekeeping missions, but also you can see that it is going into national states, also supporting them in terms of military hardware. Is it building its war chest? Is it building is it taking over the market share of Russian military trade, arms trade? So again, these are the issues that we need to look at, pay attention to, and see what the future, and map the future out of these developments. Again, some of you and colleagues would know that in Libya, for example, China is supporting a different, or has been supporting a different the government. There are two governments in Libya. So they are not necessarily coordinating there. They are not necessarily cooperating there. They seem to be competing. They seem to be maybe compartmentalized, or is it compartment where one is just looking at their own issues. But we see that in a number of areas in Zimbabwe, where I am. It is understood, and we are yet to really get into the heart and lungs of this. It is understood that China is supportive of the vice president, who has a military background. In fact, the vice president is the one who orchestrated the coup in 2017. And when he was sick and supposedly been poisoned by his boss, he went to China to get some medication and he was saved, but he was in a very bad point at some point because of being poisoned. So China is known, or is understood, or their claims that it is supporting the vice president. But we see the president himself causing with Putin, causing with the Kremlin. And the president of Zimbabwe has received some gifts in the name of helicopters. And it is also understood that he has been supporting China in terms of gold trade. As you would know, China would want to have a lot of gold for the purposes of strengthening its ruble, because of the sanctions that have been imposed on it because of the Ukraine aggression, Russia aggression in Ukraine. So there's a situation that we need to monitor, scholars need to monitor. Human rights advocates need to monitor, where we have the two countries supporting. They both support the ruling party, the ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, but the preference, it would seem that Putin and Kremlin would want to see the current president continuing. His term is ending in 2028. Perhaps he would want to have the third term, and Russia would be interested in that. But the vice president who staged the coup and handed over power to him may want to take over in 2028. So you can see that there are these fault lines, frictional points. They have not yet emerged, but they are emerging. We need to look at those. Again, colleagues, excuse me, this is not new. During the liberation struggle in Africa, both China and Russia supported them. They supported the liberation movements in Africa, but they supported different camps. If you look at South Africa, China supported the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, Russia supporting the ANC. In Zimbabwe, China supporting the current ruling party, ZANU-PF, Russia supporting ZAPU, which was led by Joshua Nkomo. It's the same thing in Mozambique, it's the same thing in Russia. So these two countries have been on the same side of the liberation movements, but supporting different factions of the liberation movements. They seem to be together when it comes to their approach to the West. They are on the same side when it comes to fighting the West, trying to push back the influence of the West, trying to replace the West in Africa, but on their own. Remove the West. They are united when the West is there. They are not necessarily united when the West is out of the picture. They may not be adversaries, they may not be enemies, but they are not necessarily collaborating in all issues. They are collaborating in others. We see their collaboration, of course, in some media spaces where they would support each other when they are attacked by the West, or when they feel attacked by the West. They support each other. They support each other's narratives on non-interference doctrine, which is not necessarily non-interference. We know, all of us know, that they do interfere into the in the national affairs of other countries. But this narrative, this fictitious narrative, that the propaganda, they support each other when it comes to that. So there are places, or there are circumstances or contexts where China and Russia cooperate. There are circumstances where they compete, where there are circumstances where they are compartmentalized, as Hamilton spoke in his new book would say. But going to the future, we need to pay attention about the resurgence of China the elevation of China's trade in arms, which is traditionally in Africa the area of Russia. We need to pay attention to BRI, which China is so much eager. Xi Jinping is so much interested in making sure that BRI succeeds. But China, Russia is becoming a threat, not very obviously, not in very overt ways, but it is becoming a threat, maybe by accident or otherwise. So these are areas that we need to pay attention to. And what do this mean? What do this mean to African people themselves? If China and Russia are going to have frictional lines, are going to be fighting in courts or confrontational to each other, what does it mean to democracy in Africa? What does it mean to the development in Africa? What does it mean to the Chinese model of state capitalism, authoritarianism? What does it mean to authoritarianism that Russia is exporting to Africa? We need to research on that and understand it, and also equip the civil society, equip the human rights defenders and the citizens themselves, because the citizens themselves in Africa, contrary to what people think, citizens would want democracy, citizens would want civil liberties, citizens would want to live their lives much better than what they are facing now. We do see, of course, the young people in West Africa, Central Africa, waving flags in support of Russia. It's not necessarily the support of Russia. It's maybe perhaps the young people there are not happy with what, for example, the French has been doing there. So if they then express their their frustrations of lack of employment by the Chinese, by the French companies there, the young people express their frustration by using Russian flags, which does not necessarily mean they do support that. So there is a need to go deeper and understand the future. Of course, it's partly guesswork, but partly surely using the evidence, the threads of evidence to understand where China-Russia relations are and their implications to democracy, to the rule of law, to climate change in Africa. Can I put a pause here and hear colleagues if they have something to say?
Is it question time? Or?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. This is Philip Nubel from Global Voices. I am also aware of the very special relationship between Zimbabwe and Belarus. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about Belarus also acting as a proxy for pro-Kremlin narratives. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Over the past few years, particularly the past 5 years, we have seen Belarus coming to the picture in Africa and particularly in Zimbabwe as a proxy. It has donated some buses to Zimbabwe, public buses for the ruling party, but I don't think we can separate Russia from Belarus. Looking at Belarus, we are looking at Russian influence in Africa. It's only going where Putin cannot go, or where Putin has got problems. Then he uses other processes like Belarus, or like the mercenaries. We know of the mercenaries, the military, the paramilitary, and the Wagner groups, where Kremlin cannot use its military strength. It uses proxies. So it's the same when it comes to countries like Belarus and others. So my quick response, which may not be, it's not thorough as you would want, but I don't think in terms of Russia coming to Africa and acting either together with China or against China. It's just Russia. It is another side of Russia, is another side of coin of Russia. Thank you.
For me, it's not a question, it's just a comment. I want to support and welcome what the facilitator said about the need of capacity for civil society when it comes to assess and engage in this collaboration between our African countries and Russia and China. We always have a lot of issue to even access information relating to this cooperation, since a lot of matters are done with a lot of opacity. He has just spoke about use of paramilitary forces by Russia to support security partnership with some countries in Central and West Africa. The issue is always even accessing the contract liaising the two countries, or the countries, Russia and the country with which they are collaborating, is very difficult. And that it is the same case for Chinese. This said, I want to hear from you, the facilitator, what kind of capacity building and equipment is useful for civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a very difficult question, and which we need to grapple with and decouple. It's easy to say let's capacitate, but capacitate them on what? Particularly when it comes to the military, where the military is involved. But I think it's important to capacitate the civic society and the other human rights defenders in terms of understanding the nuances, the activities, the tools, the approaches that China, that Russia, and others that are involved are using. Many times we think civic society know, and yet they may not have the details, may not have the critical skills to analyze the involvement and the approaches, the tools that are used by these countries. So that's one way. Really, the tools of analysis and which areas to understand. Secondly, where to get the information to equip civic society and others, including the academics themselves, where to find the information. How do you get the information? And how do you get the information without necessarily putting yourself, your family into risk? Because both Russia and China are lethal when it comes to being scrutinized. They love to operate below the radar. They want to be opaque. So when you then begin to scrutinize them, you become a target either physically. The Russians will actually poison you. With the Chinese, they find different ways of, castrating your work, closing your website, making sure your work becomes difficult. So we need civic society to understand that. But also beyond that, there is need to use how to use the digital technologies really to get the information and to really to have the evidence, because the information is available, but how to access it, how to unlock it is not easy. Thirdly or fourthly, I'm not sure, collaboration. Civic society is working at national level. We need some kind of cross-border collaborations of civil society, so that there is sharing of information, because Russia and China are all over. They are in Zimbabwe, they are in Zambia, they are elsewhere. So if civic society organizations, actors, and operatives could collaborate across across the countries and across the regions and global, like we are doing, and will help them to be able to build a stock of knowledge, a stock of approaches and tools to respond to some of these issues. But it's a question that I should I push back to the House, to all of us. And I don't claim to have answers to this one. It's a difficult question. Let's all put on the table some suggestions.
Okay, I'm really sorry, and our time is about to end. And yeah, Mr. Can you please end the session? Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, I will give you the revised version of my presentation for sharing, a more detailed one for sharing with colleagues. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.